Hello everybody, this is Suzanne, UC for Understanding Behaviour for Classroom Practice. This is the flipped collaborate for Assessment 2 folio. So the idea of this is to watch the presentation, take note of any of your questions, and then later this week we will have another collaborate session, which will be a question and answer session, a live session where you can come along and ask all of your questions, and we can go into a little bit more depth about the assessment. Okay, so the relevant unit content for Assessment 2 is anything in week 3 to 8, any content that's related to analysing principles, policies and practices, demonstrating how these are used for establishing and maintaining a productive learning environment, and planning learning environments that promote preventative models of behaviour management. There are a few activities that are particularly helpful in preparing you for your assessment. There is the week 4 activity 2, standing up to bullies. This is a particularly good activity because it asks you to look for teaching and learning models that are also linked with scholarly literature. So that's a really good, important skill to develop in preparation for your assessment, is actually finding resources and being able to justify those with academic research. Now, the other good thing about this activity is most of the bullying resources look at a preventative model of behaviour management. So rather than responding or reacting once bullying has already occurred, it looks more at the heart of why bullying occurs in the first place, looking at developing those strong relationships between students. So that's a good example of a preventative model. Week 5, activity 1 is an important activity because it is all about being creative in how we are engaging students in the classroom. And of course, when students are engaged in their learning, they're actually less likely to misbehave. So some good exploration of different methods, models, pedagogies that will actually support you keeping your students engaged in the classroom. There's also week 6, activity 1, environmental thinking. This is all about the space that students work in, the way that it's set out, maybe the way groups work together. How is that learning environment set up? Once again, to support all students, to promote preventative models of behaviour management, and making sure that all students have equal opportunities to learn safely in the classroom. So a really good activity. All of those activities will help you with your assessment, so be sure to jump on the boards and get into those activities. Okay, Assessment 2 folio, meeting the deadline. It's really important that you plan your time carefully and you hand your assessment in on time. If you do need an extension, ELAs can grant you up to 48 hours. Anything longer than 48 hours usually needs to be for extenuating circumstances such as illness or bereavement, and there needs to be supporting evidence for that. So try obviously to plan your time carefully and meet that deadline. If your ELA was a bit more lenient with penalties for your first assessment, they are very unlikely to be as lenient for the second one if you're late. There is an up to 10% per day penalty applied for lateness. So that means if you received 60% for your mark, you would lose 6% per day for every day that it's late. And after 5 days, you would receive a 0. You do need to achieve an overall 50% mark to pass this unit. So obviously, if you get a 0 for one of your assessments, that will make it very difficult to get the marks you need with the 2 remaining assessments. You would have to score very highly to be able to pass with just 2 assessments. The weighting of this assessment is 40%, so that makes it even harder. So please don't get yourself into that trap and stay in contact with your ELAs about this. Okay, the word limit for this assessment is 2,000 plus or minus 10%. So that does mean you can go up to about 2,200 maximum. Any more than that, and your ELA does not have to read beyond that. If you go over the word limit, it actually gives you an unfair advantage. in being able to meet the criteria with more words. So try to write succinctly. We recommend about 500 words per scenario at least. There are 4 scenarios, so try to use your word count evenly across those 4 scenarios. Okay, so the assessment overview. The purpose of this assignment is to produce an insightful curation of information and resources in relation to behaviour. So your first assessment was really looking at behaviour and trying to understand it through the lens of a particular behaviour theory. This will then go the next step once you've kind of looked at behaviour and analysed it, to then find resources or information that will support the learner, particularly in managing that behaviour and helping them to engage with their learning. You are required to gather information into a folio and link this with theoretical frameworks and practices. Okay, so this simply means that you will look at frameworks such as the Australian curriculum. You'll look at practices such as teaching practices, best practice in teaching and learning. So it really means that you're just doing your research to support your assignment, your folio, and that you're finding really important documents such as the curriculum and other teaching models, learning and teaching models to support your writing. You are demonstrating an ability to understand and choose appropriate models for responding to and supporting a range of behaviours. So that means that, yes, you are still using behaviour theory to a point. You won't need to go as in depth with behaviour theory in this assessment, but you'll also be looking at teaching, learning and learning models as well. So things like inquiry learning, project-based learning. You might look at Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory. So you're actually having a look into pedagogy now as well as behaviour theory. A high-level analysis and rationale for including your specific resources is required. So it's not enough just to find a resource and describe it. You actually need to support and justify why you have chosen that resource and what learning theory or what pedagogy are you drawing on to justify that resource. So how are you linking it to the behaviour as well? This will enable you to apply different principles and practices. So principles just meaning principles of teaching and learning, so ideologies around teaching and learning, and practices meaning how it actually works in the classroom. And you'll just be obviously explaining how your research, the theory behind your resource, how you rationalise it, and why you believe it's the best resource for the child, and then how it would actually work in the classroom to support the child. And all this is for the purpose of maintaining a productive learning environment so that the child themselves, the child you're focusing on, can have the best chance possible of engaging in learning, but also so that the rest of the class can also be in a productive learning environment. Obviously, if there's a child that is very disruptive, it's going to affect the rest of the class as well. So when you're focusing on the student, which you will do for the majority of your rationale, you'll focus on the particular student. It also doesn't hurt to have a think about how that impacts the rest of the class, how your resource and the use of your resource will impact on the rest of the class in a positive way. Okay, it's really important that you find or create 4 folio resources. So there are 4 scenarios and you need a different resource for each of those scenarios. So the resource can be something that is used by a student, it could be used by the teacher to support the student, or it could be used by the teacher and the student together. But again, it's very important that you do have 4 resources, and they will all be presented separately. So each resource will have a rationale that discusses how it is related to supporting and understanding the behaviour in the scenario. And each resource will also have its own reference list. So you'll have four separate items. You will also need to support your rationale using the theory covered in the relevant topic. So make sure you're going back to the learning materials and covering the topics that are relevant to that week. You are able to create your own resources. Obviously, that's a bit more of a challenge. You won't necessarily get more marks by creating your own resources. What is most important is that your resource really explicitly supports the behaviour of the child and benefits the rest of the class too. So that is the most important thing, that your resource will actually do the job of supporting that behaviour and creating a positive learning environment. So you can create your own resources, or you could even find resources that currently exist and modify them to suit your scenario. That would probably be a really good way to go if you can manage that. Otherwise, you might be able to find resources that perfectly fit your scenario anyway. Okay, so as explained before, you need 4 separate items for this folio. Each item must be clearly labelled with the week number and the topic of the scenario. So include all of your information about the item, for example, where you found the resource or a link to the resource if it's online. You can include an image if you like of your resource. You won't necessarily gain any extra marks for that, but it can be helpful for the ELA in reading and understanding your rationale clearly if they can actually see an image of the resource. But again, that's not compulsory at all. Every resource must be linked to one scenario, and of course there needs to be relevant literature to support that. Each of the 4 scenarios should have their own separate reference list. There's no need for a cover page in Turnitin. Please do not write in first person, so no use of the words me, I, we, our, or you. This is still an academic piece of writing. Okay, a few tips. It is important that you simply do not list and describe the resource. I think I mentioned that before, but it's an important point. You do need to actually underpin your writing with academic research and to be able to justify your resource according to the need of the child. The assessment is designed for you to think critically about the behaviour described in the scenario and what resource you would develop in response in a classroom setting. So you will need to allocate some of your word count into making it clear what the behaviour is that you're addressing. There can be mention of a behaviour theory to try to understand that behaviour, but you won't go into anywhere near as much depth as you did with assessment 1 in using theory to describe the behaviour. The focus this time will be a little bit more on actually finding a resource that matches the behaviour or to support the behaviour, and then explaining and justifying that resource. Just beware of a resource that looks for a quick fix solution. We are looking for a resource here that will be used in the classroom actively by the teacher or used with the student by the teacher. Please do not draw on any kind of quick fix solutions, and by that we mean things like seeking more funding, sending the student to the principal, or employing a teacher aide. This isn't something we want to see, because this isn't really addressing behaviour from a teaching and learning point of view. These are quick fix solutions and outside of what the teacher really, what their responsibility is. I also warn against very simplistic resources. If you do a Google search for teaching resources, you'll find things like worksheets, sticker charts, lists of rules, and so on. Try to stay away from these if possible. These are really just simple tools. We want you to get into a little bit more depth about what is effective teaching and learning and what are effective pedagogies and models of teaching and learning. So try to stay away from those very basic types of resources. And it's really important to know that if there is no academic underpinning in this folio, that you will not be able to pass the assessment. Now, if you're unsure about whether your resource has enough depth in it, feel free to post the idea of your resource to your discussion board, and your ELA will be able to give you some feedback. Also, in the extended version of this PowerPoint, there are some examples on one of the slides of what a teaching resource could include. Okay, the submission details, same place as last time, go to assignments. This time click on assignment 2 folio. Please label your file with assessment 2 folio final so that we know that it is your final copy. You do have an area where you can submit a draft in Canvas, which is a good idea to do because you can then get yourself a plagiarism report to check to see if you have enough, you've been using enough of your own words. It's really important that you paraphrase your information, that you don't just copy and paste from your source, because if you do too much of that, you can be at risk of a plagiarism incident being reported. So make sure that if you are using any big quotes, that you use quotation marks around them. But it is more preferable to always be using your own words and demonstrating your own understanding. And then, of course, reference what your source was. So make sure that you're using in-text citations throughout your folio to acknowledge anywhere that you have drawn on a source for your information. Okay, so the criteria that we will be assessing on is the selection of your resource to make sure that it matches your scenario. So the better your resource matches the scenario, the higher you will score marks-wise. And a resource can actually be a theory. It can be a theory of learning, teaching and learning. It could be a policy. It could be like a school policy, a behaviour policy. It could be an example of practice. It could be a strategy. But if it's a strategy, make sure it is quite a big strategy so that you've got enough room to explore the depth of that strategy. It could be some kind of in-class physical tool to match the scenario. We're also assessing on the development and discussion about understanding and supporting behaviour. So there is still that element of showing or demonstrating that you can understand behaviour, you can recognise it, you can identify it, and you know how to support it. And then also understanding the nature and development of behaviours in learners and how to respond to them appropriately. So that is where the resources come in, that they are your chosen ways to respond to the behaviour that you've identified. And of course, your writing has to be at university master's level. So make sure that you are proofreading your work very carefully. And we do have a service called Smart Thinking, where you can actually upload a draft of an essay to check that your academic writing is up to scratch. So I highly recommend doing that to give you a little bit of an advantage before you hand your assessment in. Okay, so we have the holistic rubric again. Just a reminder, hopefully you know this from last time, that with the holistic rubric you must have evidence of each of the dot points at every level to get that particular grade. So to receive a pass, you need to have met each one of these dot points on the pass level. So on the pass level of the rubric, it says that every item must have a descriptive rationale that discusses how the resource can be related to supporting and understanding behaviour in the scenario. So that's you have to do that at the very minimum to pass. Specific examples relate to preventative models. So I know we'll have more questions about preventative models, but as I said before, this really just means that your approach to behaviour management is not one of just being reactive, so not just giving punishments after the fact, but actually looking at models that support either prevention of behaviour, or if there is already some poor behaviour in the classroom, models or resources that prevent that behaviour from escalating further. So we can certainly be finding resources for behaviour that already exists, as long as those resources are actually helping to prevent further escalation of behaviour and to develop productive learning environments. So the main thing about that whole preventative model terminology is that you're just, you're moving away from the old school approach to behaviour management, which is really just to punish. So even looking at things like restorative practices, that's definitely a preventative model as an example. Each item discusses principles, policy and practice. Now, we've had a few concerns about this in the past, so we just want to make it clear here that as long as you cover principles of teaching and learning, that you include some kind of policy and some kind of teaching practice across the 4 scenarios, that will be fine. You don't need to include principles, policies and practice for every single scenario, as long as you cover those 3 elements across all of your, across the whole folio, that will be fine. It doesn't have to be in relation to each scenario. I know it says that here on the rubric, but with the 500 word count for each scenario, we recognise that that is extremely difficult. So as long as somewhere in your folio you have covered all 3 of those elements, principles, policy and practices, you will be able to pass this assessment. The rationale indicates some understanding of behaviour in learners and how to respond to them appropriately. The works draws upon appropriate ranges of sources. Okay, so that's just all about referencing and making sure that you have academic underpinning throughout your folio, and your writing needs to be at university level. Okay, so please make sure you come back to, at the very least, come back to this pass level of the rubric to make sure you are completely covered, and then have a look very closely at the rest of the rubric also. If you're hoping to gain higher than a pass, then at the credit level, you'll be looking at a very descriptive and comprehensive rationale. I think one of the most important things with trying to achieve higher marks is that you really stay on track. It's often when you go off track and you sidetrack away from the criteria that it makes it much harder for you to receive a higher mark. So keep this rubric right by your side. The credit level also asks that your rationale indicates a consistent understanding of behaviours in learners, and that you have identified evidence-based practice and a consistency with selected approaches and strategies. So making it very clear that you have a full understanding of how to respond to behaviour effectively. Okay, at the distinction level, each item has been carefully integrated. It's descriptive and comprehensive, and there are clear links to contemporary perspectives and practices. So contemporary meaning sort of any sort of resources around teaching and learning within the last 10 years or so is what would be considered contemporary. And obviously, if you've got a wider range of resources, you're more likely to receive a higher level mark as well. And right at the top, the high distinction, quite difficult to get, but at the higher level, you have synthesised and carefully integrated your rationale. There is fluent understanding of behaviours. Your writing is concise and logical. So there are just some few keywords that I've pulled out there, but have a really good close look at the rubric, and we might be able to discuss that a bit further at the Q&A session. Well, that's all. Thank you very much for listening. Good luck with writing your assessment, and hope to see you at the Q&A soon. Thank you for listening.